Welcome students. Today we are going to discuss Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, which was a compendium of 100 tales and which was regarded as the most wonderful masterpiece of Western literature produced in the Renaissance. The stories are told by several narrators who have fled the plague-ridden city of Florence. In 1871, one prominent literary scholar by the name Francesco de Sanctis in History of Italian Literature described Decameron as the human comedy, thus suggesting that it is worthy of comparison to Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Now, we will discuss the Decameron as the earliest Renaissance prose. In the 14th century, the Renaissance seemed to have begun with Italian literature through the works of Francesco Petrarch, Giovanni Boccaccio and Dante Alighieri. Sonnet sequence Calzioneri dedicated to Laura, Decameron, a collection of short stories, and Divine Comedy by Dante is regarded as the pioneer of Renaissance literature in Italy. Of the three, Boccaccio was the only one who attempted to rediscover and reinterpret the ancient tales which existed in his time. He set the standard for Italian literature and himself conformed to those standards. Thus, Boccaccio can be said to have advanced even further than Petrarch had achieved in his lifetime. He sought to dignify both prose as well as poetry. Before these three writers were writing in Italy, the literary language of the Italians was nothing but Latin. It is with Boccaccio that we find an attempt has been made to write something in original. And along with Boccaccio, by the turn of the century, we find that there were many other authors in Italian who tried to integrate the method of the Greeks and the Latin into the work which was contemporary Italian. The invention of printing press became a catalyst by increasing the number of books available to the people. There was, in addition to the Latin and Greek text, the mainstream Italian literature which began to be written in Italian prose and poetry and drama. Other than being a pioneer work of Renaissance literature, Decameron is also to be given a respect as the first prose writing in Italian. Stylistically speaking, it is the most perfect example of prose fiction, and its influence on the Renaissance literature throughout the continent of Europe is enormous. Boccaccio wrote the prose in the spoken language of the Italian people. They were the educated Italian people. His narrative style is absolutely free from all kinds of ornamentation, and that is the reason it flows in a very quick paced, fast prose style. His vocabulary is amusing, it is stimulating, it is also very outrageous, and it is extremely suggestive at points. Therefore, it is not surprising that as a text, Decameron became the source of many Italian literature which came in the following centuries. The work also contained a wonderful example of lyrical poetry, all written by Boccaccio himself. These are called canzones, and they form a body of Boccaccio's finest work of poetry. Therefore, we can safely say that without Giovanni Boccaccio, the literary culmination of Italian Renaissance would have been historically unimaginable, unintelligible, the source of Decameron. When plague struck the city of Florence, it seems that people reacted to it in various ways. Some people avoided excess, thinking that in this way they will be spared from suffering death by this disease. They lived together, but they lived away from all kinds of contamination. They were not allowed to speak to the others who had fallen sick, and they did not listen to the sick men's call. They entertained themselves with music, believing that the power of music to heal their body and to keep away the infections of the plague. There were some others who believed that if they indulge in excesses, they will be spared of the Black Death. So they indulged in heavy drinking, loud singing, and satisfying every pleasure and whim of their mind, sometimes indulging in the pleasures of the flesh. They also avoided the sick, and they disregarded all kinds of laws, whether it was a law which was divine law or it was a law of humanity, and they wanted to be away from all suffering, avoid the suffering and turn a blind eye to the suffering. There was still another group of people who took the middle path. They neither restricted themselves from excessive food, excessive drinking, but they walked about the city smelling flowers, and they did not care for what was happening to the others around them. Still, there were others who thought that the best way to deal with the plague was to run away from the city of Florence or whichever city was infected. They only cared about themselves. They abandoned their possessions, they abandoned their homes, and they abandoned every known relative who may have fallen sick. These actually make out the thematic source of Decameron story, which is a prose novella. As a work of literature, we can compare the storytelling of Decameron with the storytelling of Arabian Nights. In the 1001 Night that Shahrazadi had spoken those stories, she tells the tales in order to survive and in order to save her life. Similarly, we have in Decameron the 100 tales which are being told by the people who have run away to escape death, and they are trying to divert their mind from the death that they have witnessed at such close quarters. Turning to the frame narrative structure, it is usually believed that this frame narrative structure originates from Panchatantra, which is a Sanskrit fable of 500 AD. Boccaccio borrowed storytelling of all his stories, almost all. Some of these tales have their origin in old stories in Hebrew, in Persian literature, and some even in Latin of the classical age. What is interesting is that stories are extremely erotic in their content, and they do not in this sense match the stories which were told in Arabian Nights or in the stories of Panchatantra. The explanation given for such a thematic boldness in the tales comes from certain 19th century critics who believe that, fearing that the death is knocking at their door, the men and the women, particularly the women part of the brigata, felt that they could actually indulge in bawdy tales. They tell stories as if there is no tomorrow. On the other hand, some of the stories that they tell relate to the history of their own city, state, or their own country. These storytelling of the novella occupy 10 days. Hence, the book has been given the title The Decameron, which means 10 days work. And together, taking into account that the stories have been told by 10 people over a period of 10 days, the total number of stories is 100 in all. But there is one particular story which is narrated by Boccaccio in his own persona, and therefore total number of stories become 101. That particular story was narrated by Boccaccio on the 4th day of storytelling, almost as a defense of what the criticism about his tales were prevalent in the society of his time. Now, the frame story is about the flight of 10 young people. They are leaving the city of Florence because it has been struck by plague, and they go to a countryside thinking that they will be able to avoid dying, and among themselves they choose on each particular day a king or a queen. The duty of this king or a queen is to assign a topic for the day's storytelling. And although Boccaccio borrowed the tales from various sources and from various centuries, it is his wonderful job that he transforms these tales to something which the contemporary reader could relate to. Some of the characters that Boccaccio uses were characters who had at that point in time been living in Florence and other Italian cities. Brings to my mind Giotte, Bondone, Gudi Cavalcanti and Saladin, Emperor Saladin. they actually existed at this point in time. Even these fictional characters were based on real people, real lives living in Italy or outside Italy. Giordano took one characteristic or one situation in which the character reacted and used it in his story. This compelling technique of the tales make Decameron a very irresistible reading even for the modern readers, and also for the writers who have since his time extensively borrowed from his source matter. All the members of the Brigata belonged to the upper class Italy. They all respected convention, but they were unprejudiced about personal morality or personal behavior of a person. And that is the reason why so many of the tales are hedonistic in their content. Next, we will discuss the themes which are explored by Giovanni Boccaccio in Decameron. The Decameron is said to be a reflection of Boccaccio's society, which is threatened by terrible Black Death. In this work, Boccaccio departs from the transcendental idealism of the poetry of Dante and also that of Petrarch, and he brings into literature for the first time the realism that the 14th century Italian artists had brought to painting. Brings to my mind, the painting that comes to my mind when I think of Boccaccio is Birth of Venus by Botticelli. That sort of transcendentalism given into a realistic picture. The merging of the two in the best mode is attained in both these works. Written in vernacular prose, the Decameron conveys ambiguity, the paradox, the earthiness, and the subtlety of the human experience of his time. Because we cannot deny the fact that the Renaissance man who has begun to concentrate on himself and rather than God and the afterlife has gone through different experiences which are very earthly by nature. Also significant is the fact that the tales, rather than presenting the morality even of the author, as was usual in the Middle Age literature, encourages various kinds of interpretation, signaling a change which is very Renaissance in its flavor from God-centered worldview to the human-centered worldview. And we have conflicting perspectives coming in, juxtaposed by side, but there is no disharmony in this. The fundamental theme of Decameron is the struggle between life and death, because the Brigata is run away from the city of Florence in order to save their life, not only to save their life, but also to avoid thinking of death. No one in the Brigata is ever allowed to reflect on the fact that there is a Black Death raging through the country. And it shows that the multiple ways in which life can assert itself, regardless of whatever the morality of the time is, whatever the belief of the time is or the convention of time is, if we concentrate on life, we get an opportunity to live. The brigade of young people, called the Brigata, abandons the hell-infested, plague-ridden city of Florence. And when there is so much of suffering around them, it is not unnatural that, having escaped to an Eden-like atmosphere, they shut out all the forms of talking or discussing or even reflecting upon the thought of death. It is said by most critics of 19th century that Boccaccio wrote this novel. He declared in his preface that for the women to divert themselves from the heartache that burdened them at this point in time. He said that the men have many outlets for their pain. It included taking a walk, going for hawking, going for hunting, fishing, horseback riding, gambling, or even going to a prostitute's house, all of which diminished the pain that they felt at the death of the dear and the near ones. Women, on the other hand, did not have these same luxuries. That is the reason, faced with the prospect of looming death due to incurable plague, men and women could read Decameron. They indulged in forbidden pleasure, and these things had hitherto been prohibited by church, but the idea was to concentrate on life. Therefore, one common theme that runs through all the stories of Decameron is about sexual relationship, extramarital affairs and other illicit associations. There are tales of seduction, there are tales of sodomy, rape, where both sexes are portrayed as being carnal creatures who concentrate only on the life on earth. Many of these stories also center around female desires in particular. In the society that Giovanni was writing, and also the society on which the novella is set, the women did not have any other role in the society but to become a wife and a mother. In Decameron, Boccaccio therefore demonstrates that while they may not have a significant social standing in the society, women have an upper hand, and that upper hand is always in relation to the man and woman relationship. Boccaccio also depicts women as superior beings as far as cunning is concerned. Throughout the stories, the characters are that especially the women characters tend to formulate very devious plans involving a degree of the cunning, and all this comes from his female characters. Then the subject matter of love, fortune, religion also make entry into Decameron. Death is always there. Death is the backdrop. Death is the backdrop for the frame story, and also sometimes plays a keynote in the discussion of the stories or in the conclusions of the story. But consciously, the narrators, the storytellers, avoid talking about death in general. These themes appear numerous times in Decameron. Same story might have the themes repeated, and we have to be aware of the structure of these themes from day to day or from story to story, and the multitude of characters which explore these stories, from nobles to fools to kings to abbess to the prior, and it gives an image of the people of the time in all their weaknesses as well as man in its heroic virtue. So, we find that Boccaccio presents life from very earthly point of view, which is very Renaissance, making him an absolutely Renaissance character, and complete absence of moral judgment, moral intentions. If a corrupt clergy is being shown, if the clergy is being shown as seducing a young girl, it is shown as in respect to a self-indulgence. It is a matter for amusement, but there is no judgment or satire involved in it. Therefore, although Decameron is not depraved as a literature, but we cannot call it as a moral literature. Boccaccio's masterpiece is therefore a collection which highlights some social incidents, social issues, and then he just presents them together before the reader without making any manipulation or any manipulative judgment on either his society or on his tales. We are going to discuss the frame narrative of this novella. Based on the humorous French tales which was popular throughout the Middle Ages, Decameron centers on the 7 women and 3 men who hope to escape death in the year 1348, and they retreat to the hills of Fiesole, very close to the city of Florence. The frame narrative begins with the description of plague and leads up to introduction of these characters, and they are hiding in the country for 10 days, and they will once again return to the city of Florence, meet in church, and then disperse in their daily life. Where these 10 days are concerned, they are candidly telling each other stories which will deal with topics which possibly not conventionally discussed among men and women in that society. These are tales of human intelligence, human intrigue, about love, about indulging in pleasures of the flesh. In this way, 100 stories get narrated at the end of the 10 days. Although 100 novellas comprise numerous themes and innumerable number of characters, he uses a frame structure along with his poems, the canzonis. There is a preface and there is an epilogue, and in that sense it gives a stylistic unity to the entire work of prose, and therefore it does not appear at all fragmented, although the nature of the stories from the speaker to speaker is also extremely different. Instead, what we get is just a collection and of a whole thing and not unrelated stories. Now, these 10 young people refer to stories, and the stories also, as well as the characters also, are referred to the brigata. Each one of them will be selected a king or a queen for each one of those 10 days, and their role is to assign a topic for the day. Plus, on every day, the 10th tale of the day is narrated by a character called Duono. Duono does not conform to any particular theme of the day, because of his wit, because of his amusing storytelling technique, he is given a leeway as far as deviating from the tale's mainstay is concerned. The regent appointed will, even when he is appointed the regent, although he gives a topic to the rest of his group, he does not himself stick to the group. The basic plot of the stories will be a commentary on the corruption also of the Renaissance church, because many of the characters are the priests, the nuns, the cardinals and the abbots of the Catholic Church, and how they have indulged in forbidden pleasures, forbidden by the church and their vows. And sometimes some of the stories will talk about traveling merchants through various cities, because Florence was not an agrarian society in the Renaissance at all. The Florence that we read about in Renaissance is a city of merchants, where traders, bankers and other kinds of tradesmen made their living, moving away from the medieval society which was existing in other parts of Europe. Each day the company, previous day's king and the queen, selects the king or the queen for the next day, and also the theme of the story for the next day is declared on the previous day. So, it gives the narrator some time to tell the story, create the story. Each day also includes a short introduction, a short conclusion to the frame story, and other daily activities are also described in the storytelling as course. Thus, the frame narrative of the Decameron is what provides it with the basic unity. We will talk about the summary of Pampinea's 10 tales, but first thing we need to remember is on the first day, Pampinea is nominated as the queen. The storytelling is an open topic. Anyone can choose their own topic and narrate a tale. We notice that although there is no assigned theme on this particular day, the 6 tales of this day deal with one person criticizing or censoring the actions of another person, and 4 of the tales are about the satire on Catholic Church. If we move to the most interesting tale that Pampinea narrates, it is her tale on day 8. She talks about a scholar who falls in love with a widow, and being in love with someone else, it causes him to spend a winter's night waiting for her in the snow. But on a later occasion, angered by this development, he advises the same widow to go and stand for a whole day outside in the sun without any clothes on her body, and exposing herself to the difficulties of having flies and mosquitoes flying around her. Filomena is the queen who is selected for the second day, and she is the first queen who assigns a topic to the group. What is the topic that she assigns? It is misadventure that suddenly ends happily. Now, she, having given the topic, also narrates a tale on this. However, Filomena's most interesting tale does not occur on her own day of storytelling, but on day 4, when she narrates the tale 5, that is about Lisabetta. Lisabetta's brothers murder her lover. He appears in her dream to tell that where his body is buried, Now, Lisabetta secretly goes and gets his head interned. She puts it in a pot of basil and she weeps over that pot of basil every day. Her brothers, when they learn about it, take away the head, and subsequently she dies of grief. The importance of this story lies in the fact that years later, John Keats uses the same story to write a poem of his own on Lisabetta. Nifile's 10 Tales, but Nifile, I must tell you, was selected the queen during the third day, and in the tales that she asks Brigata to be narrated on that day, they had to adhere to the topic that a person is either painfully acquired something or he has lost something and regained that thing. And Nifile tells the most interesting tale because it is very witty. On day 6, it is the tale 4. She talks about Cicibio, who is a cook in Corrado Gianfazzi's home, and she has a ready word, who has a ready word, and when he serves one leg of crane on his master's table, master is extremely angry, and how he manages to save his day by giving a very witty comment and avoiding being punished. Thank you, students, for being here and analyzing with me the first 3 days' tales. The rest of the tales will be analyzed on another program the next time.